My name is Claire, and the day I got engaged was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. For as long as I can remember, I had dreamed of that moment, standing in a place that felt magical, surrounded by people who mattered, hearing the words that would bind me to the man I loved. And when it finally happened, it felt like every dream I had ever carried in my heart was coming true all at once. Ethan, my fiancé, had planned everything perfectly. He always did. That was one of the reasons I fell in love with him in the first place. His ability to make life feel safe, organized, even when mine had always been chaotic. That night, he led me to the little rooftop garden above the restaurant where we'd had our first date. The city lights glittered below us like 1,000 candles, and a soft breeze carried the faint smell of jasmine from the potted flowers he had arranged. When he dropped to one knee and opened the small velvet box, my heart stopped. I can still hear the sound of the city fading around me, as if the world held its breath waiting for my answer. The diamonds sparkled under the string lights above us, but it wasn't the ring that made me say yes. It was the way he looked at me, with a mix of fear and certainty, as though I was the only person who had ever mattered. Tears filled my eyes as I whispered yes, and the rooftop erupted with cheers. Our friends and family stepped out from hiding places, clapping and laughing, champagne glasses in hand. My mother hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and my friends circled around me screaming with joy. For the first time in years, I felt like the little girl I once was, the one who believed in happy endings. The celebration was a blur of laughter, music, and warmth. Ethan's arm never left my waist, and I couldn't stop staring at the ring, the symbol of everything we had built together. Every obstacle we had overcome, every late-night talk about our dreams, every promise we had whispered in the dark, it all led to this moment. In that instant, I thought I knew who Ethan was. I thought I knew what our future would look like. Marriage, a home filled with love, children who would inherit the best parts of both of us. I thought I understood the man standing beside me, the man who had just promised me forever. But what I didn't know was that this perfect night, this flawless engagement, was also the beginning of the unraveling. Because while I was busy imagining the future, Ethan was still holding on to a past he had never told me about. A past that would soon crash into my life with a force strong enough to destroy everything I thought was real. The engagement party carried on like a dream I didn't want to wake from. Laughter echoed through the rooftop garden, the string lights swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the clinking of champagne glasses felt like music. I moved from one circle of guests to another, receiving hugs, kisses, and endless congratulations. Everyone seemed genuinely happy for us, and I couldn't stop smiling. Ethan stayed close by, his hand either holding mine or resting on the small of my back, as though he couldn't bear to let go. He looked proud, prouder than I had ever seen him, and that pride only deepened my belief that our love was strong, pure, and unshakable. But then, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A chill moved through the warm evening air, though no one else seemed to notice. As I turned to greet another friend, my gaze caught on a woman standing near the far corner of the rooftop. She wasn't talking, she wasn't smiling, and she wasn't clapping. She just stood there, a half-empty glass of champagne in her hand, staring directly at Ethan. Her expression wasn't one of happiness or even curiosity. It was something else. Something sharp, almost accusatory, as if she knew a secret no one else in the room did. I frowned, glancing between her and Ethan. He hadn't noticed her yet, and I wondered who she was. A distant relative? A friend of his family? Maybe one of his co-workers? She didn't look familiar, and yet there was something about the way she carried herself that made her presence impossible to ignore. Finally, Ethan turned. The moment his eyes landed on her, I felt his body stiffen beside me. It was just for a second, but I caught it. The flicker of recognition, the flash of unease in his eyes. His smile faltered before he quickly masked it, squeezing my hand a little tighter than before. "Who is that?" I whispered, leaning toward him. He glanced back at me too quickly. "Just someone my family knows." Don't worry about it. But I did worry. Because if she was just someone, why did his jaw tighten every time she shifted her gaze? Why did his fingers dig into mine as if he was holding me in place, afraid I might drift toward her? As the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that her eyes never left us. No matter where I moved, no matter how many people surrounded me, I always felt her gaze like a weight pressing against my back. At one point, when Ethan was pulled away by his friends, I found myself alone near the dessert table. That's when she approached. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she came closer, her presence commanding in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. She stopped just a few feet from me, her eyes scanning my face with an unsettling intensity. Then, without a smile, she leaned in slightly and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You don't know who you're marrying." Before I could respond, she straightened her posture, gave me the faintest hint of a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and disappeared back into the crowd as if nothing had happened. My heart pounded in my chest. For the first time that night, the sparkle of my engagement ring felt heavier than it should have, like a promise wrapped in secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. For the rest of the evening, I tried to convince myself that the woman's words meant nothing. Parties attract all sorts of strange people, I reasoned. Maybe she was drunk, or maybe she had mistaken Ethan for someone else. But deep down, her voice echoed in my head like a bell I couldn't silence. You don't know who you're marrying. When the last guests left and the rooftop grew quiet again, Ethan wrapped his arms around me, pressing his forehead to mine. You were perfect tonight, he murmured, his smile warm and reassuring. I wanted to let his embrace wash away the unease, but I couldn't stop myself from asking. Who was that woman, Ethan? The one in the black dress. She came up to me. I felt his body tense, just for a fraction of a second, before he pulled back and gave me the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. Oh, her! She's nobody important, just a distant family acquaintance. Don't waste a second thinking about her. But the problem was, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The next few days were supposed to be filled with wedding planning bliss. My mom wanted to take me dress shopping, my friends were already talking about bridal showers, and Ethan's family offered to host a formal engagement dinner. Everything should have been perfect. But instead of feeling joy, I found myself studying Ethan more closely than ever before. That's when I noticed the small cracks. He used to be open with me about everything, his day at work, his frustrations, even his silly jokes about the people in his office. But suddenly, he grew guarded. When his phone buzzed, he would flip it face down. If I walked into the room while he was on a call, his voice would drop, and he would end the conversation quickly. He told me he was just busy, that work was more demanding now, but I knew him well enough to see the difference between stress and secrecy. One night, I caught him staring at a photograph on his desk. It was of his parents, or so he claimed, but I realized I had never actually met them. Not once in the 3 years we'd been together. Every time I asked about visiting them, he had an excuse. They were traveling, they were unwell, they were private people. At first I believed him, but now every excuse sounded rehearsed, like a script he had practiced too many times. Ethan, I asked gently, why haven't I ever met your family? Don't you think it's time? His jaw tightened, and he looked at me with something that resembled fear more than annoyance. We'll get to that when the time is right, he said, his tone firm, leaving no room for questions. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of our relationship in my mind. Had I missed the signs? The unanswered questions? The little inconsistencies? Or was I letting one strange encounter with a stranger ruin the best thing that ever happened to me? I wanted to trust him. God, I wanted to believe that the man I said yes to was exactly who I thought he was. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it was already growing roots deep inside me. And then, just when I was starting to convince myself that I was imagining things, something happened that made me realize I wasn't paranoid at all. I wasn't imagining it. Ethan was hiding something, and soon I was going to find out what. It happened on a Thursday evening, one of those ordinary nights that should have been forgettable. Ethan had told me he was working late at the office, finalizing an important project that had been dragging on for weeks. I believed him at first, but something in his tone gnawed at me. The same tightness in his voice, the same clipped answers I'd been hearing ever since the engagement party. I tried to distract myself, cooking dinner, watching television, flipping through bridal magazines, but my mind kept circling back to the same thought. What if he isn't where he says he is? By 9 o'clock, my curiosity had become unbearable. I told myself I wasn't checking up on him, that I just wanted peace of mind. But the truth was darker. I didn't trust him anymore, not completely. So I grabbed my keys, drove downtown, and parked near his office building. Only his car wasn't there. My chest tightened as I sat in the dark, staring at the empty parking spot he usually took. For a long moment, I debated calling him, but instinct told me not to. Something inside me whispered that if I waited just a little longer, I'd get the answer I was looking for, and I did. At 9:47, I spotted him. Ethan walked briskly down the sidewalk, not toward his office, but away from it. He wasn't alone. The woman from the engagement party, the one in the black dress, the one who had whispered her warning to me, was walking beside him. They weren't touching, but their body language spoke volumes. He leaned in close when he spoke, his hand moving in sharp, almost defensive gestures. She, in turn, kept her arms folded tightly across her chest, her face set in an expression of cold determination. I ducked lower in my car seat, heart pounding, as they turned into a quiet side street and entered a small cafe. From my spot across the road, I could see them through the large front window. Ethan looked tense, his jaw clenched, his fingers drumming against the table. The woman, however, looked composed, almost calculating, as she slid a manila folder across to him. He opened it, glanced at the contents, and immediately snapped it shut, his face pale. He leaned forward, speaking harshly, his voice raised enough that even from across the street I could see the heat in his expression. The woman, unfazed, simply shrugged and replied with calm, deliberate words that seemed to slice through his anger. At one point, she glanced toward the window, her eyes scanning the street outside. I froze, convinced for a terrifying second that she had seen me. But her gaze passed over my car, and she returned to Ethan with a look that could only be described as triumphant. The meeting lasted less than half an hour, but to me, it felt like hours. When Ethan finally stood up, his movements were rigid, almost robotic, as though he was carrying a weight too heavy for his body. The woman remained seated, sipping her coffee with infuriating calm as he stormed out of the cafe. I didn't follow him immediately. Instead, I sat in my car, trembling, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Why was he meeting her in secret? What was in that folder? And most importantly, what was he hiding from me? When I finally made it home that night, Ethan was already there, sitting on the couch as if nothing had happened. He smiled when I walked in, kissed me on the forehead, and asked about my evening. But as I looked at him, all I could see was the image of him across that cafe table, his face twisted in fear and anger, his hands clutching a folder full of secrets. And for the first time since we met, I realized I didn't know the man I was about to marry. Not at all. For days after I saw Ethan with that woman, I lived in a haze of suspicion. Every word he said, every gesture he made, I analyzed as if it might reveal the truth. The man who once felt like home now felt like a stranger sleeping beside me. He still smiled, still kissed me goodbye in the mornings. But I noticed the shadows in his eyes, the way he sometimes seemed lost in thought, miles away from me. I knew I couldn't confront him yet, not without proof. If I accused him with nothing but my own observations, he would brush me off, call me paranoid, and I'd be left doubting myself. So I waited. I watched. And when the opportunity came, I took it. It was a Saturday afternoon. Ethan had left for a gym session, one of his rituals that usually kept him gone for a couple of hours. I stayed behind, pretending to be buried in wedding planning, but as soon as the door closed, my heart began racing. I told myself I wasn't snooping. I was searching for answers I had a right to know. I went to his office, a room I had always respected as his private space, where he kept his work files and laptop. Normally, it was neat, every paper stacked, every pen aligned. But that day, I noticed something different. A drawer that was slightly ajar, as if closed in a hurry. Inside was a small stack of folders, nothing unusual at first glance. Contracts, reports, receipts. But at the bottom, half hidden beneath the rest, I found something that froze me in place. A second manila folder, just like the one I had seen the woman slide across the cafe table. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, some old, faded with time, others more recent. And the faces in them were ones I recognized all too well. My mother, my father, me. There were pictures from my childhood, me on my first day of school, me blowing out birthday candles, me holding my high school diploma. But what made my stomach turn was that they weren't just ordinary family photos. They were taken from angles that suggested distance, as though someone had been watching us without our knowledge. At the back of the folder was a document, an old newspaper clipping about a car accident, my father's accident, the one I had grown up believing was just a tragic twist of fate. But in the margins of the article were notes written in Ethan's handwriting, names circled, dates highlighted, questions scrawled in hurried strokes. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might shatter my ribs. What was Ethan doing with this? Why did he have photos of my family, of me, from long before we had ever met? Suddenly, everything the mysterious woman had said made sense. You don't know who you're marrying. She hadn't been warning me about some trivial lie. She had been pointing to something much bigger, something dangerous. The sound of a key turning in the front door jolted me back to reality. Panic surged through me as I shoved the folder back into the drawer, slamming it shut, just as Ethan's footsteps echoed in the hallway. My hands shook, my pulse raced, but I forced myself to look calm when he walked into the room. "Hey," he said casually, wiping sweat from his forehead with a towel. "What are you up to?" "Just working on the guest list," I lied, my voice steadier than I felt. He leaned down and kissed me on the cheek, the same way he always did, and for a terrifying moment, I wondered if he could feel the rapid hammering of my heart. As he disappeared into the shower, I sat frozen in place, staring at the closed drawer. I had found proof that Ethan wasn't who I thought he was, but I still didn't know why. And I realized then that the man I loved wasn't just hiding secrets. He was hiding my secrets, ones I never even knew existed. I couldn't stop thinking about that folder. Even after Ethan fell asleep that night, his breathing deep and steady beside me, my mind was racing, replaying every image I had seen, my childhood birthdays, my parents smiling beside me, the yellowed clipping of the car accident that had stolen my father from me. Why did Ethan have these things? How long had he been collecting them? And more terrifyingly, why did he start before we ever met? The next morning, I pretended everything was fine. I smiled at Ethan over breakfast, kissed him goodbye at the door, and waved as he drove off. But the moment his car disappeared, I grabbed my purse and keys and headed straight to the library archives. If Ethan wouldn't give me answers, I would find them myself. The newspaper clipping was my first lead. I remembered the headline vividly because it was seared into my memory from childhood. Local man killed in tragic collision. But when I pulled up the full article in the archives, I discovered details I had never known. My father's car hadn't simply skidded on wet pavement like my mother always said. According to the report, another vehicle had been seen leaving the scene, speeding away before authorities arrived. Witnesses had described it as a dark sedan. The driver was never identified. For years, I had believed my father's death was an accident. But reading that article with fresh eyes, it looked far more like a mystery, one that someone had gone to great lengths to bury. And suddenly, Ethan's folder made even less sense. Why would he be investigating my father's death? As I dug deeper, I uncovered something that made my blood run cold. The name of one of the lead investigators at the time of the accident, Detective Samuel Hartwell. That name wasn't just familiar, it was family. Hartwell was my mother's maiden name. The detective was my uncle. And yet, I had no memory of ever meeting him. My mother never mentioned him. No family photos, no stories, no explanations. It was as if he had been erased. I sat frozen at the library table, my hands trembling as the pieces clicked into place. Ethan wasn't just hiding things about his own past. He was digging into mine. He had known about my family before I ever told him. He had studied my life like a case file. When I returned home, Ethan was already there, sitting at his desk, flipping through papers as though nothing in the world was wrong. My voice shook as I asked the question that had been burning in me all day. "Ethan, how long have you known who I am?" His hand stilled. Slowly he lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "I've always known, Claire," he said softly, "from the very first day we met." The room spun around me, my stomach dropping like I'd stepped off a cliff. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, barely able to breathe. He leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable, and uttered the words that would change everything. "Your father's death wasn't an accident. And my family was there that night." The moment those words left Ethan's lips, it felt like the ground beneath me split open. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I gripped the edge of the table just to keep myself from collapsing. "What do you mean your family was there that night?" I demanded, my voice breaking between fury and fear. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just sat there, his face pale, his jaw clenched, like he was fighting some internal war. Finally, he stood and walked toward me, but I stepped back, raising a trembling hand. "Don't," I warned. "Don't come any closer until you explain." Right now, his eyes softened, but that only made my stomach twist harder. "Claire, I didn't want to tell you like this. I thought I could protect you from it. I thought maybe we could build a life without digging up the past." "The past?" I snapped. "You mean my father's death? The tragedy that destroyed my family? You've known something all along, haven't you?" He swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes." Anger surged through me, hot and uncontrollable. "Then you've been lying to me since the moment we met. Every date, every promise, every 'I love you,' it was all built on a lie." "It wasn't a lie." His voice rose, sharp and desperate. "I love you, Claire. That part is real. It's the truest thing in my life. But yes, I knew who you were before we met. I knew what happened to your father. My family, my father, was connected to it. He was the one driving that night." The room tilted, my vision blurring as if the words themselves had knocked the air out of me. "Your father?" Ethan's voice cracked. "He left the scene. He panicked. No one ever proved it was him, and the case went cold. But my family knew. I grew up with the weight of that secret, and when I met you, I didn't know how to tell you that the man I loved more than anything had a father who destroyed your life." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "So you thought it was better to lie? To pretend? To let me fall in love with you without knowing the truth? I thought if I told you, you'd never look at me the same way. I thought I'd lose you before I even had the chance to love you." His words cut deep, but they weren't enough to soothe the storm inside me. My entire body shook as I whispered, "You should have given me the choice, Ethan. The choice to walk away. Instead, you trapped me in a life built on silence." For a long, heavy moment, we just stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other across the room. He looked broken, shattered by his own confession. But I was the one whose world had just collapsed. And in that moment, one truth became painfully clear. Love and betrayal could coexist in the same person. And Ethan was living proof of it. The hours after Ethan's confession felt like moving through a nightmare with no way to wake up. Every time I looked at him, I saw two versions of the same man. The one I loved, who had made me laugh until my stomach hurt and held me through my darkest days, and the one who had deliberately hidden the most devastating truth about my family for years. I went to the bedroom and shut the door, but of course he followed. He stood on the other side, his voice muffled but urgent. "Claire, please. Don't shut me out. I need you to understand." "Understand?" The word burned like acid. How could he ask me to understand when he had stolen my right to the truth? I pressed my forehead to the door and whispered to myself. He knew. All this time, he knew. When I finally opened the door, his eyes were red, his expression raw with fear. But the sight didn't soften me, it only sharpened the betrayal. "Do you realize what you've done to me?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "You let me love you, you let me plan a future with you, all while knowing your father was responsible for tearing mine apart. You weren't just lying about your family, you were lying about who you are." Ethan shook his head violently. "No, that's not true. Who I am with you is real. Everything I've ever said, every moment we've shared, it's all real. I never wanted my father's sins to poison what we had." "But they did," I spat back. "The moment you decided to keep it from me, you poisoned everything." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of my uneven breathing. Finally, Ethan stepped closer, his voice cracking as he spoke. "I thought I was protecting you, Claire. Protecting us. You don't know what it's like to grow up with that kind of guilt. Watching my father carry that secret, knowing he ruined someone's life. When I met you, I saw a chance to be better, to build something good. And I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd never let me near you." I stared at him, and for a fleeting moment, I almost saw the boy he once must have been, scared, desperate, drowning in the weight of a secret he didn't choose. But sympathy clashed with fury, and fury won. "You should have trusted me enough to decide for myself," I said, my voice breaking. "Instead, you decided for me. You decided that I didn't deserve the truth, that I wasn't strong enough to handle it. And that's not love, Ethan. That's control." His face fell as though I'd struck him, and part of me hated how much it hurt to say it, because I still loved him. God help me, I still loved him. But love wasn't enough anymore, not after this. I turned away from him, gripping the windowsill as tears finally spilled down my cheeks. Outside, the city lights blinked cold and distant, a cruel reminder that the world kept moving even as mine collapsed. Behind me, Ethan whispered, "Tell me how to fix this." But there was no fixing it. Not then, maybe not ever. In that moment, I realized the greatest betrayal wasn't just what his father had done to my family. It was what Ethan had done to me, stealing the truth, stealing my choice, and leaving me to wonder if anything between us had ever truly been real. In the days that followed, the engagement ring on my finger felt heavier than any stone should. Every time I looked at it, I thought about the night Ethan proposed, how certain I had been that our future was sealed, how blindly I had stepped into forever. Now, that ring was no longer a promise. It was a question mark, one I carried with me everywhere. I avoided Ethan as much as I could. We still lived under the same roof, but we moved like ghosts, passing each other in silence, careful not to touch. At night, I lay awake on the edge of the bed, pretending to sleep while his restless movements betrayed that he was just as haunted as I was. The problem wasn't just the lie itself. It was the ripple effect. If Ethan had been capable of hiding something this monumental from me, what else was he capable of? Could I ever truly trust him again? Or would I always wonder what truths lingered in the shadows, waiting to destroy me when I least expected it? My mother noticed the change in me almost immediately. "You don't look like a bride-to-be," she said gently one afternoon when I stopped by her house. I wanted to tell her everything, to pour out the secret that was rotting my engagement from the inside out. But how could I? How could I admit that the man she had welcomed into her home, the man who promised to cherish her daughter, was the son of the person who had killed my father? Instead, I smiled weakly and said, "I'm just tired." But the truth was, I wasn't tired. I was broken. By the end of the week, I knew I couldn't keep living in limbo. I had to make a choice. Stay with Ethan and try to rebuild trust on a foundation that had already cracked, or walk away from the man I loved and the life we had planned together. Neither option felt survivable. One night, I finally asked him to sit with me in the living room. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly as if he already knew what was coming. "I can't live like this," I told him, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I can't keep pretending we're okay when we're not. You took away my choice when you hid the truth from me. And now, the only thing left is for me to decide what comes next." Ethan's voice cracked as he whispered, "Please don't leave me, Claire. I'll do anything. Therapy, honesty, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you." I looked at him, and for a moment, my heart ached so much I thought it might shatter. I loved him. That was the cruelest part of it all. I loved him more than I ever thought possible. But love without trust was like a house built on sand. Sooner or later, it was bound to sink. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I'll ever look at you the same way again." The silence that followed was unbearable. Ethan bowed his head, and I saw the first tear fall down his cheek. A man who had always seemed so strong, so composed, was crumbling in front of me. And yet, I couldn't move to comfort him. Not this time. Because the truth was, the choice I had to make wasn't just about him. It was about me. About whether I valued my own peace more than the pieces of love he was offering me now. And for the first time since our engagement, I realized I had the power to choose. The morning I made my decision, the world outside seemed painfully ordinary. The sun rose, the birds sang, and life carried on as if my own wasn't hanging in pieces. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, staring at the engagement ring on my finger. It sparkled in the sunlight, a beautiful symbol of a future that no longer felt possible. When Ethan walked in, he looked at me as if he already knew. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of water. For once, he didn't try to speak first. He just waited. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Ethan, I've thought about this every hour of every day since you told me the truth. And no matter how I twist it, no matter how I try to imagine forgiving you, I always come back to the same place. You took something from me that I can never get back. My right to know, my right to choose, and because of that, I can't stay." His shoulders sagged, as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. "Claire, please. I love you. I've loved you from the moment I saw you. Don't let my father's sins destroy us." Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to keep going. "It's not just about your father. It's about you. You let me walk into a life built on lies. You had chance after chance to tell me the truth, but you didn't. You let me fall in love with a version of you that wasn't real. And now, every time I look at you, I see the lies instead of the love." He crossed the room in 2 steps, dropping to his knees in front of me, his hands gripping mine so tightly it hurt. "Then let me prove myself to you. Let me show you that I can be honest, that I can rebuild what I broke. Don't end this. Don't end us." For a moment, my heart screamed at me to give in, to believe him, to let love win over betrayal. But my mind was stronger, and deep down, I knew that even if we tried, even if I forced myself to forgive, the fracture would always remain. The doubt would always be there. I pulled my hands free, slipping the ring off my finger. I set it gently on the table between us, its sparkle now dull to me. "I can't marry you, Ethan. I can't build a future on secrets. I need to protect myself now, even if it breaks me." His face crumpled, his body shaking as he buried his face in his hands. I wanted to comfort him, but I stayed where I was, tears streaming silently down my own cheeks. Because this was the hardest thing I had ever done, and the bravest. I stood, grabbed my bag, and walked to the door. My legs felt heavy, my chest hollow, but with each step I felt something stir inside me. Strength. Freedom. A piece of myself I thought I had lost when I fell into Ethan's world of lies. At the doorway, I paused and whispered, "Goodbye." When I stepped outside, the sunlight hit my face, and for the first time in weeks I felt like I could breathe. The future ahead of me was uncertain, and the pain of betrayal would take time to heal. But at least now I knew I was walking into that future on my own terms, and that, more than anything, was enough.